On December 26, 2019, we will have the grandmother of all eclipses. This is the 3 Capricorn solar eclipse, and it represents the third triplicity of womanhood, known as the crone or wise woman. In ancient religions, the goddess was represented as a triplicity, which suggested or denoted 3 major phases of a woman's life. The first part of life is childhood up until puberty. In the tarot, it's represented by the card the Fool. And the Fool is chosen for this card because it is the beginning of life. It is the time of our lives when we are innocent, trusting, have complete faith in the universe around us, and we are completely ignorant and unaware of the dangers that surround us because you don't know what you don't know. Also, the Fool is gender neutral. It does not have a gender identity, and it does not have secondary sex characteristics that demarcate it into a reproductively functional male or female. So the Fool covers all the years of development or life experience from birth to pre-adolescence. The second phase of a woman's life are the reproductive years. They are the time from puberty to the time of menopause. During those years, a woman is reproductively viable, she is fertile, and she is full of potential. She is represented by the High Priestess in the tarot. The High Priestess is chosen for this card because the High Priestess represents pure potential. And during the reproductive time of a woman's life, she is both full of potential in her own development as well as full of potential for the beginning of new life. So all mysteries and things to be revealed and promised can come through her or manifest in her during this time. The third stage of life, or the third triplicity, is called all the years after menopause, so menopause until death. For a woman and the goddess, this is considered the crone or the wise woman stage of life. This is the part of life that we have come to when we are no longer reproductively viable, and the things that we have to give back and to nurture and to support with are coming from a very different place based on our experience and our ability to understand what's necessary and important in life. One of the things that can get, and it's represented by the Empress in the tarot, one of the things that can get confusing for people looking at the tarot cards is that the High Priestess is a young maiden who is not pregnant, whereas the Empress appears to be a woman who is fertile and pregnant. And while the tarot interpretations are very specific and can be more confusing when we look at it like this, the thing about the Empress when it comes to the triplicity of the goddess and the crone or wise woman stage of existence is that the crone or the wise woman is realized. She is everything, all of her potential manifested and unfolded and embraced, ripened. She is all that she's going to be at this point, and that is the Empress. The Empress is no longer the promise of a future life or a future child or a future development. The Empress is all of those things realized, and now from that and from those experiences, she has so much more richness and depth and the ability to give back. And this represents the third triplicity of the goddess and the third stage of life for women. Now, there are some people who would say, well, what about the boys? Well, you know, there's room for the boys as well. So again, the Fool for men represents childhood from birth to pre-adolescence, puberty. And we just covered that with the woman, so we're going to skip this section and go to the next part. So the reproductively viable years for a man are symbolized by the tarot card, the Magician. And yes, men do have reproductively viable years when they are more optimally able to produce healthy, strong children than other times. Old sperm does not produce healthy babies. So the reproductively viable years would be the years between adolescence or puberty to andropause. So in case no one told you, there is such a thing as a male menopause. It's called andropause. And that's the time of life when the testosterone levels start to dip, some sexual irregularity and dysfunction starts to occur, the prostate starts to enlarge, and all sorts of age-related changes, degenerative changes are occurring in their body as well. So between these two times, puberty and andropause are the reproductively optimal years. And this is the time of, again, potential. The ability to go out into the world and start something new, to create, to be creative, is covered by the magician and these years. When a man reaches andropause, which is the male equivalent of menopause, this is the time of life when a man has come into his own, and he now becomes the elder or the statesman, the wise man. He draws from his experiences, he has learned from his mistakes, and he has many, many things to offer and teach as a matter of protection and guardianship of the next generation. So even with the man, we have the 3 stages of life. We don't necessarily have the 3 triplicities of the god, because, you know, it's been a very patriarchal religion for a long time, so they prefer to have 1 figurehead as opposed to 3. But there you go. So by now you're probably saying to yourself, well, what does this have to do with the eclipse? Well, the eclipse is occurring in Capricorn, and the eclipse absolutely has to do with that 3rd stage of human development, right? So in women, it's the wise woman or the crone, and in men, it's the elder or the wise man. This solar eclipse also is part of an evolutionary process that we've been going through. So we had a grand alignment in Taurus back in 2000, May 3rd, 2000, as a matter of fact. And now we're finishing this off with a 3-degree Capricorn eclipse, which is another grand alignment, because if you look, we have the Sun, Moon, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, in Capricorn. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We literally have over half the solar system in the sign of Capricorn at this time. Now, with that said, also keep in mind that Saturn rules wisdom, it rules old age, it rules experience, it rules reality, it rules time, and the measurement of time and the measurement of other things. Saturn is very, very specific about where the boundaries are, right? And one of the things about maturity is that you learn where the boundaries are. When you're young, all you have are possibilities. When you're older, you have restrictions. And restrictions are not necessarily a bad thing, because restrictions allow us to not only create stronger structures, you have to have restrictions on how far you can build out to create strong structures within, but restrictions are also how you create power. So when you take power and you harness it by restricting where it can go. So power is created by restriction. There's good things there. What's interesting about this particular eclipse, I just want to point out, is that not only is Saturn ruling the eclipse, it is also ruling the eclipse chart. So here, when the eclipse occurs, we've got it set for Washington, okay? Libra will be rising in the chart. Saturn is the co-ruler of Libra, and in this chart at that degree, it is also the ruler of the Almuten, or Almuten, of the ascendant. So Saturn becomes a co-ruler for the ascendant, for the eclipse chart in the United States. This makes this extremely important for us. Interestingly, and I thought this was pretty interesting, Saturn, which is heavily emphasized in this eclipse because of all these Capricorn planets, is also the natural ruler for England, because they are a Capricorn Aries nation. So it will be interesting to see how this eclipse plays out over the next 6 months for Great Britain, since they're being heavily impacted by this eclipse as well. Other things that are happening with this particular eclipse, Mercury is out of bounds. So it's moving way fast, very crazy. So there's a strong and heavy emphasis on mercurial things, right? Mercury is in the sign of Sagittarius, and it's near the galactic center. So with this said, there are a couple of things I would expect with this. With Mercury and Sag, legal affairs, the judicial system, truth, ethics, integrity, principles, all of those things that have to do with building better futures. And also foreigners, foreign trade, and speculation. All of those things should be emphasized as a result of this eclipse. So we'll be feeling this for easily another 6 months or so. I'm in big, in-your-face kind of feeling it. The other thing with this Mercury and Sagittarius being emphasized like this, one of the other things that I would also expect is, well, no, that's not entirely true. No, we're going to leave it at that. Sorry. Okay. All right. So with that, oh, right, that's what it was. Mercury and Sagittarius and out of bounds, moving fast. Heavy emphasis on communication, information flying fast and furious. There should also, I would not be surprised if there was not also some discussion about the reformation or reform of either existing laws that shouldn't have been pushed through, but existing laws that really need a facelift, so a lot of revision and reform in laws, because Jupiter and Sagittarius rules the judicial system and the laws, as well as a strong emphasis on both education, because Sagittarius and Jupiter are also higher education, so college level education, as well as a lot of communication and back and forth discussion about languages or the need for second and third languages. And for those of you who only speak one language, this is not something you're going to want to hear, but yeah, it's there. It's there, and definitely something to be considered. All right. Now, with all of this going on, we also have Mars, Saturn, and Venus as the strongest planets in the chart. And Mars, out of those three, Mars is the strongest one of them all, and it's conjunct fixed star Regina, which is actually a really good thing. And we're going to talk about Regina in a second. So, interesting notes about this eclipse. The eclipse activation occurred around or beginning December 17th and all the way through the 20th, but around 17th, 18th when we should have felt it. So if you were looking at potentially dealing with something as a result of this eclipse, I would go back to those days, December 17th, 18th, and see what happened, because they may be a sign of things to come kind of thing, kind of the curtain being pulled back, give you a preview of what to expect. Now, with that said, the other thing that's very interesting about this eclipse is that the next eclipse in January is going to get activated at the same time that this eclipse is occurring. So this whole week around Christmas, because this eclipse occurs December 26th, this whole week around Christmas is going to be a hella week. Oh my God. So this is important for people who are being impacted by the eclipse. Not everybody's going to be feeling it directly, which is good. And when you're not feeling it directly, what that means is that there are changes in your life that you'll have control over. If you're receiving this eclipse, if you have planets at 3 Capricorn or 20 Capricorn Cancer, because that's the January eclipse, and you're taking these eclipses, there are a lot of elements in your life that are going to be well beyond your control or agreement or decision making or anything. You're just going to have to go along for the ride and let fate play itself out. This doesn't mean that it's bad. Remember, with this heavy emphasis in Capricorn, as terrifying as this might look, because nobody ever has anything happy to say about Capricorn, right? You know, who rules, structure, all discipline, obligation, responsibility, all the stuff nobody wants to hear about. But the reality is that Saturn and Capricorn are builders, and Saturn I can't say this enough, in saying this all year, Saturn in its own sign of rulership is the best possible place for it to be, because it gives us the possibility to bring out the best of Capricorn, and the best of Saturn. So wisdom, integrity, like responsibility, all the things that make reality a safe, strong, secure place to be, so that it's not one giant hallucinogenic, psychedelic mushroom trip. This is what Saturn can do for us. So we're in a good place, even though it may not necessarily seem like it. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So I'm including this chart because I think it's pretty interesting. This is the grand alignment in Taurus that occurred in, May 3rd, 2000. Okay. Now, one of the things that was interesting about this particular eclipse is when it happened, there was a whole lot of whoop, whoop whoop going on because everyone was very excited about it. And with that said, naturally, it was very anticlimactic that nothing dramatic happened with it, right? I don't know what people are expecting. I think maybe the Earth is split open or something. Or no, if I remember correctly, I believe that when this particular grand alignment occurred, people were expecting space aliens to land or something equally huge and over the top. Naturally, none of these things happened. So, but the thing with astrology and the thing with life is sometimes we've got to take a step back and we've got to look at the bigger picture involved, right? So with this much emphasis on a sign, with these many planets grouped together in a sign, it's not necessarily about the immediate here and nows, it's literally about the bigger picture. The next time that we had a lineup of this many planets in one sign was, surprise, now, this year, coming up this, December 26th. So this is what, 19, almost 20 years later, we're looking at another major alignment or shift here. So with this particular type of thing, what we're usually looking at is mass consciousness, right? So what is happening on an evolutionary level? And I touched on this in another video, and I'll go over it again here. So Taurus represents womanhood, the reproductive years of womanhood, fertility, reproduction, food, resources, all of those things that make and sustain life, okay? Because it is represented by the bull, and not actually the bull. Taurus is represented by the cow, like the cow in India that's considered sacred because it's the giver of life, okay? The cow is very sacred because it sustains life in so many ways. So what did we see since between 2000 and now, when we're about to go through another paradigm shift in our social evolution? We saw a rise in pushback where women's rights were concerned and where women are viewed and valued in society. And it's not like it was in the 1970s. This was much less socially violent because we didn't need to push that hard anymore. We didn't have to cut teeth like we did in the 70s. This was a much more gentle resistance and pushback and persuasion. And one of the things that we've seen that's also been receiving a lot of hostile attack has been women's rights, women's reproduction, all of these things. And there's some really good footnotes about what was going on and what happened immediately after this grand alignment occurred, where an attack on women's rights globally was concerned. So the other is Venus rules Taurus, and Venus is the planet that rules pleasures, right? And also intimacy and seduction and all those, lovers and romance, that sort of thing. And one of the things that's been a big theme between 2000 and now it's reached literally its climax, no pun intended, have been issues of sex and rape, and sexual coercion. Because Venus rules physical intimacy. Venus rules the reception or the receiving of amorous intention. But there is a difference between receiving that and having it forced on you, having it hoisted upon you. So learning to separate these two things and being clear that these are separate things has been a huge conversation over the last 20 years, reaching a pitch right now. And as we head into the Capricorn alignment, moving forward, all of this is kind of coming to a head. So the Taurus alignment would represent the second triplicity of womanhood, or the goddess. It would be represent the reproductive years, and that's what we're dealing with. As we go into the Capricorn alignment, it's represented the crone, or the wise woman. So women, the elders, the female elders of the tribe, as it were, the reason and sense that comes with being an older woman who's been through all of that and is not driven by her hormones, right? These are the things that are going to become very, very important now as we get through this eclipse, moving forward for the next, well, about 43 years for the next quantum jump, but this is kind of where we're at. All right, so this eclipse was conjunct Jupiter and Saturn. So we've got, and Jupiter is involved in the eclipse we're under right now, coming up on December 26th. So that's interesting. And Saturn is also part of this eclipse, and again, part of the eclipse that we're dealing with that's shifting us forward as for the next 24 years in Capricorn. And what's interesting to note about that is that Jupiter and Saturn both have to do with social norms and social rules, wisdom, and our moral and social obligations to each other. Not the unborn, not the dead, but the present and living amongst us. So we're still finishing out this cycle, and hopefully we'll be able to get through this and learn more than enough as we do it. So again, it was in effect for almost 20 years for this cycle, right? And Taurus rules women, fertility, pleasure, food, soil, sustainability, movable resources, also hoarding, and more. So what's interesting about Taurus and hoarding and this 20-year cycle we've had is, if you've noticed, we've had a rise in the billionaire class. Like the rich have literally gotten richer, and the poor have gotten poorer to benefit them and at our expense. So one of the things somebody pointed out that's kind of interesting, you know, when you think about it, amassing tremendous amounts of money beyond what you actually need to live or enjoy, like literally when you're amassing, when you're driven to hang on to and acquire so much money just for the sake of having it, to the point that literally your children couldn't spend this much money in a lifetime. That's hoarding. You're hoarding money, as opposed to stuff or junk or animals. It's still hoarding, and hoarding comes under the Taurus energy. As we move into Capricorn, of course, this is all going to break up and dispense, because Capricorn is all about being pragmatic and lean and practical and making efficient use of your resources, more than what is the word, hoarding. So it will be interesting to see what happens to the millionaire and billionaire classes as we enter the next social evolutionary cycle in Capricorn. Oh, also wanted to point out, with this this alignment in Taurus, we also had Mercury and Venus involved in here. And guess what Mercury and Venus rule? Mercury rules young people and Venus rules young women. And what has, as we come to a climactic ending for this cycle, what has been the primary targets and unfortunate sacrifices in this battle for this old way of existing to die and the new one to come forth? The sacrifices, unfortunately, have been young people and young women. So both of them have been in a line of fire, as we are, you know, the old and the new are fighting with each other to try and, you know, get or keep the ground that they've acquired. So it's almost over. We're heading to a better place, and unfortunately, apparently, we need to go through this because we're that hard-headed. So God forgive us all. All right, next one. So this promises to be actually a much easier cycle to get through as we move forward. And the reason I say that is this. So here, with a Taurus alignment in 2000 that we're just finishing out now, so we have all these planets in Taurus, right? So, you know, this in and of itself is what it is. But if you look at this chart, the only thing we had was an inconjunct, or also called a quincunx, to Pluto. Just ignore those two for a second, right? But here, look at this. We had squares from Uranus and Neptune. So it really, that Uranus-Neptune square to these Taurus planets really made it difficult for us to kind of get out of our own way. And when we did, we kind of, kind of lurched forward. So if you could imagine like an old jalopy, like herking and jerking and lurching, like choo, choo, kind of thing. And for those who don't know what a jalopy is, it's an old car, right? An old beat up car. And it's, imagine it's billowing all kinds of smoke and, just this cloud of smoke around the car. And every time the car like lurches forward, it's like lurching forward, and it finally gets some clarity because it's moved out of that oil cloud, of smoke that's around the car. And then it stalls and herks and jerks, and now it's got all that smoke around it again. So it's been challenging to kind of see where we need to go and to see past a lot of the smoke screens and confusion with this particular last 20 years. It's been necessary, and there are some other things that go with it, which I'll get into in a different video. But for now, just understand the last 20 years were as difficult as they felt. It's not your imagination. And the good news is that we are heading into better times. And the reason we are heading into better times is because all these Capricorn planets are not receiving any hard aspects. None. So we've got a trine from Uranus, which is going to be interesting. We've got a sextile with Mars. And these two we're not going to count because they're semi-sextiles. And even Neptune here sets up sextiles. So as we move forward with this cycle of experience with all this Capricorn, this is a supported, easy, flowing, productive, not getting in our own way cycle of experience and social evolution that we're heading into. So we're heading into some marvelous, marvelous times when we can actually get out of our own way and get something done. Now, with that said, right here, here's a little bit of a fly in the ointment, is that Uranus and Taurus, right? So Uranus and Taurus is making a trine to those Capricorn planets, and that would seem to be a good thing, but if you know anything about Uranus, it doesn't matter if it's an easy aspect or a hard aspect, it's still a Uranian aspect. So we can certainly expect things literally coming out of left field that we could not possibly have planned or prepared for. That will definitely test our ability to endure, be resourceful, manage our resources, as well as find ingenious solutions to things. But all of these things will lead to breakthroughs and incredible advances and a whole lot of separating the wheat from the chaff. So we will really be able to make major quantum leaps in terms of progress, both technologically and socially and agriculturally and all the ways that matter. But it will not be easy. And the worst kinds of changes are the ones you weren't prepared for. So we're not going to be thrilled with these things when we get thrown curveballs and these unexpected situations. But the good news is we will have the ability to rise up and meet those challenges with a fair amount of ease and success. And we're good with that. Now, there are some people who would say that Chiron, I don't personally use Chiron. You might. I don't. Just not my cup of tea. And that isn't to say that it won't change later, but for right now, it's just not big on my radar. But so there are some people who say, oh, but there's Chiron, it's squaring the sun, moon, and Jupiter. So here's what I would say about that as a possibility. And your observations and experience may show you something else as we go along. I'm certainly not the be-all and all authority on that. With Chiron squaring this eclipse and Jupiter in Capricorn, there should be, I would expect, some serious blowback or repercussions to selfishness. And the reason I say that is because Chiron in Aries, Aries is a very self-oriented sign, which can exhibit as selfishness. All the signs are capable of being selfish. But Aries is very self-directed, and Aries is very self-propelled. And it can appear, because of that, that Aries is very self-absorbed and selfish, you know, as if nobody else does these things. So with Chiron there, Chiron also represents the areas of life that we struggle with, because we have the most to teach and we can never really heal ourselves. So it's I'll give you an example. The girl from Mexico who's here on medical conditions, she was all over the news with the Congress and stuff. She was one of the kids that the Trump administration was deporting because their medical visas ran out, and many of them would die without the medical treatment they're only able to receive here in the States and have been receiving. She, of course, is one of them. She has a rare condition, and I will put it in the comments below when I find the links to it. But she has a rare condition, and they were working with her to try and find a cure for her condition. And in the process of finding a cure for her condition, she has lived easily 10 years longer than she was predicted to by the doctors, because her condition is, they don't have a cure for it, and nobody lives that long. But in the process of trying to find a cure for her, they've also found a cure and medicines for many, many other people. So the very thing that she cannot heal in herself has turned into this thing that has given life to other people. So from her pain comes a wellspring of healing for others. That is Chiron. With Chiron in Aries, the challenge becomes, this need to be, this need to assert yourself in situations, this need to make sure people know who you are, this need to be important and recognized and valued and seen, to be seen. Identity is everything for Aries. This very thing that does not want to be resolved because Chiron sits there is also the very thing that's going to come up as a challenge and a very real thing that needs to be addressed. With it squaring the Sun, Moon, and Jupiter in Capricorn, the challenge then becomes breaking down the old identities and the old traditional ideas about who we are, who we're supposed to be, or who we're supposed to become, versus who we think we are and who we think we need to be. So identity and identity politics, and that's already started, but it's going to come to a real head moving forward, is going to be on the table. But these are going to be identity politics about things that we can't fix or change. You can't fix or change your race. You cannot fix or change your height. Well, I suppose you could, but not really. And you can only fix or change your gender only if you live in a first world country and you have access to the money and the means to make that happen. But without that, it's impossible, because it's a modern construct. Like changing your gender and sex, or whatever it is they're calling it, is the equivalent of dyeing your hair. Without modern innovation and intervention, it would not happen. So it's that kind of thing that is not innately changeable. Okay, so that will definitely come up. The other thing with Aries versus Capricorn, this new moon in Jupiter and Chiron in Aries, also, I hate to say it, but there's going to be some shuffling of positions and power dynamics, because these are both about power signs, right? Between young and old people, or not old people, older people. I'm one of those old people. Older people having a rightful place in society and getting the due respect that they do deserve, because they have lived this long and they have they've lived this long and you're still here. Trust me, now when you get to this age, you'll understand how important that little notation is. But also, older people making space and allowing room for younger people to do what they do, which is push the future forward. So we're, again, it's all about identity personally and identity in society. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So with that said, I'm not a huge, I don't use Chiron too much in my personal practice. I'm just not, it just doesn't thrill me. But if I were to use it here, that's what I would use it for. So there you go. So where we are headed moving forward, where we're coming from, all about the resources, baby, all about the resources and values and principles and self-indulgence and all sorts of stuff, but not unaccompanied by a lot of confusion and a lot of delusion and a lot of not really being sure what we're doing or how we're getting there. Where we're heading to is a much more practical place. It's much easier to get to, much more supported. The biggest challenge we're going to have is going to be about identity and identity politics. So let's see what else we got on tap for you. All right, so the 3 Capricorn eclipse will be occurring December 26th. Simultaneously, the next eclipse behind it, which is exact and official in January 10th, as a matter of fact, will also be activated at the same time this eclipse is happening. So we've got some interesting holidays ahead of us, and huge portent involved, but good things. Really, it's all going to be good. It's all going to be good. Now, with this particular eclipse, some of the more notable things about it, again, Mars is the strongest planet in the eclipse chart. Mars is also conjunct the fixed star Agena. So there's a lot of what is the word I'm looking for? There's a lot of interpretations and delineations. That's the word. There are a lot of delineations for the fixed star Agena depending on how it's configured in a chart. And too many to go into here, and not necessarily useful for what we need to understand about moving forward and looking at this picture. But here is what's very interesting about this. So Agena is in the constellation of the Centaur, right? The half horse, half human gods from Greek mythology, who were known for being uncouth and wild, feral, wine-loving, joke-making, horse-farting beasts, beastly men. Very lustful, very wine-loving. Oh my gosh, they were such a... So if they weren't fighting, they were farting and making jokes and drinking wine and all that sort of stuff, right? Like a giant wilderness fraternity. And they generally shied away from humanity as a whole, preferring to live amongst themselves out in the wilds. However, there is one centaur in particular that is the most famous one, and he was, surprise, Chiron. The same Chiron that comes up strongly configured in this chart over here in Aries that we were just talking about as it hits that Sun, Moon, Jupiter. Right? Now, I want to read you a little story about Chiron that I found, and I thought this particularly fascinating, so I think you're going to enjoy it as well. And this is what I found about Chiron. So, centaurs are half-human, half-horse creatures in Greek mythology. They have the body of a horse and the torso, head, and arms of a man. They were considered to be the children of Ixion, king of Lapiths, and Nephel, a cloud made in the image of Hera. According to a different myth, however, they were all born from the union of a single centaurus with magnesium mares. One of the best-known centaurs is Chiron, a wise centaur. Although most centaurs were depicted as lustful and wild, Chiron was a notable exception, modest and civilized. He was known for his medicinal skills and teaching abilities. He lived on Mount Pelion in Thessaly and was the tutor of a number of Greek mythical characters, such as Achilles. Remember the Achilles tendon we talked about in the last video? And Aesculapius. Aesculapius, for those of you who don't know, is the father of medicine. Back to our story. Chiron was immortal. However, he was also accidentally wounded by Heracles with an arrow treated with the blood of the monster Hydra, causing him insufferable pains. So when Heracles asked his father to free Prometheus and Zeus, when Heracles asked his father to free Prometheus, Zeus demanded that someone must be sacrificed. Chiron volunteered and died, both to free Prometheus and himself from the pain. How's that? So Chiron, when we talk about the wounds that don't heal, and the parts of ourselves where we have the most to give other people, even though we don't personally benefit from it, with the mythology, this also points to the areas of sacrifice or self-sacrifice for the betterment of other people and the alleviation of our own suffering, to let something go that we're intrinsically attached to, like our lives in the case of Chiron, so that we can allow someone else benefit from that, and we can hopefully redeem ourselves and alleviate our own suffering in the process. So with Chiron scoring these ecliptic degrees in these planets, and also involving Jupiter, we've got, and Jupiter, again, very Sagittarius, horsey, Chiron, Centaur sort of thing there. We have a lot of strong indication that there's almost a need to fall on the sword, not out of stubbornness or irrational trying to prove a point, principle sort of thing, but to fall on the sword, literally to save another life and our own suffering in the process. So that's a lot of, it's the noble sacrifice is really what I'm trying to get at, the noble sacrifice. So this is what we're looking at with this eclipse and the energies over the next 6 months dealing with this. So somewhere in our own lives as well, we may be looking at parts of our life where we need to give something up to protect someone else, or to give significant life-sustaining benefit to somebody else. And in the process of letting that go, that part of ourselves go for someone else's benefit, we alleviate our own suffering and end our own condition of being in pain in the process. Noble sacrifice, which is not sacrificing other people, it's sacrificing something of your own or yourself for the improvement and betterment of other people, because you can. Interesting stuff. So I thought that was interesting, the tie-ins to Chiron and the Achilles tendon from the last video and this eclipse. So interesting symbolism here moving forward. So now, before I close out this section, I just want to say to you, right, one of the things, because we're always interested in how this impacts ourselves as well. When you look at this, one of the things you might want to do is first go backward in time with the Taurus alignment, the grand alignment in Taurus in 2000, right? So over the last 20 years, or however long you've been alive, if you're new to the planet, welcome aboard. For those of you who were alive when the Grand Taurus alignment occurred, this would affect you. Everybody else who came along after that, this doesn't affect you. So look at where in your life that Taurus alignment occurred, where in your chart this occurred, and did you see any significant impact or changes in yourself and your mentality and the way you see life and approach things from that? And can you see the Taurian kind of thing going on, any Taurus symbolism with that? Right? And then, of course, looking at how it affects and impacts and interconnects with other parts of your chart. With the Capricorn eclipse, this grand alignment in Capricorn, for those of you who are new to the planet, and you are definitely participating in this one with us, one of the things that I would look at, because this is a really well-supported alignment, this is such an easier, less confusing, less stressful, more productive alignment. Look at what house or houses, plural, this is falling in your chart. And I would look for, this is the word I want you guys to remember, I would look for a renaissance to occur there. So the Renaissance was a time in medieval times that was known for a resurgence of interest and support for the arts and the sciences and entertainment and all these beautiful things, you know, the beautiful era. But it's like this spring comes back and flowers bloom and things grow and all this wonderful thing happens again, like the good things in life return that make life beautiful, right? So wherever this grand alignment of Capricorn is occurring in your house, or houses, plural, because it's a big spread here, I would look for this to be an area of your life that's going to get a renewed and very focused attention and surge of energy and support that has the potential, not a guarantee, but a potential to do really outstanding things for you moving forward. So there's a coalescing that may start occurring as a result of this final Earth alignment. Now, with that said, remember, this is potential, not guaranteed. Nothing in your chart, nothing by transit, nothing by solar correction, nothing by progression, nothing astrologically guarantees anything. You are given the opportunity and the potential to realize something. You have to do the work. You have to make it happen. And sometimes what you think needs to happen, what you want to happen, is not the same thing as what's going to happen, because the universe has a very, very different idea about where you need to be and what you need to be doing in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So with that said, right now we're being given a grand and glorious opportunity in our lives to experience a renaissance. Promises and potentials and opportunities are there, but we're going to have to do the work. So take a look at that, and wherever you see it, seize the day. Carpe diem, baby. Carpe diem. Seize the day. Put it in motion. Get serious about it. Make a plan. Do it, do it, do it. And understand that it may not turn out the way you're expecting it to, and that's not really the point. The point is the process and getting you through this gate so that you can end up in this whole other world, this whole new world for yourself, because you're building it. You're building it, baby. You're building it. And also, too, remember, Chiron is involved at its ecliptic point, and Mars, the strongest star in the chart for the eclipse, is conjunct Aegina, which is the constellation of the Centaur, and the most famous one is Chiron. We're right back to Chiron again. And Chiron, the myth of Chiron, is about self-sacrifice for the benefit of someone else. It's about giving up something intrinsically important to ourselves. And for us, not our lives, but our identity. And your identity is as inimitable to you as your life. Sometimes we might need to sacrifice some portion of our identity to make room for other people, or to protect or benefit other people, and fall on that sword and let that part of our life go so that we can end our own suffering in the process. So there's that. Now, just want to close this because that's a weird kind of note to end on. This is not the same thing as taking your own life. So if you are feeling bad and you're really struggling with hopelessness, I would say that the story of Chiron and the Centaur is not about being hopeless and giving up on life and committing suicide. If you are feeling this way, please, please, please reach out and find appropriate professionals or support people to talk to, and hang in there. You know, life is full of humiliations and insult and injury. Life is just one long endurance test, unfortunately. Like, we don't really get a whole lot of choice in the matter. But with that said, you know, every day we're being given a second chance to try again and do it differently this time. So I'm going to share this with you. It may or may not help at all, but it is another way of looking at something, and this may be important, right? So you and I know there's no way to to describe depression adequately because it's literally hopelessness, right? So, I mean, many of us have experienced really disappointing likelihoods, but that's not the same thing. It's like the difference between having a herpes virus versus having stage 4 pancreatic cancer. One, you can find a way to live with. The other, it's an undeniable long shot that anything's going to change the trajectory you're on. And you have to live with that instead. And the feeling between depression and, being pessimistic is kind of the same thing. So remember, much of our quality of life is based on our feelings. Literally, how your quality of life is determined by how you feel. Because when you can't feel pleasure and you can't feel joy, feel pleasure, feel joy, that is the marker of depression. And depression absolutely impairs your quality of life. And circumstances and all those sort of things have very little to do with it, because you could have everything you could possibly need materially and still feel hopeless and still feel depressed. And it's all about feelings. So feelings have a huge impact on our quality of life. And feelings, like the ocean and tides, changes, moves constantly. It's not a static thing. So you're not always going to be stuck here. You're just having a feeling. And the most important thing is we have to figure out how to get you feeling differently, right? Because it's not the circumstances, it's the feelings that are keeping you down. So remember that life is a long string of heartaches, disappointments, and humiliations for everybody, with occasional moments of gloriousness. Be kind to each other and be gentle with yourself. You have more than earned your moment in the sun. You got to stick around long enough to get it. And that day comes too. Just ask anybody who has survived worse. So if you're feeling depressed and you're feeling hopeless, understand it's a feeling, not a truth. Because the fact of the matter is you could have everything in the world and still be depressed because you feel hopeless. Your life isn't hopeless because you got everything working for you, but you feel hopeless. It's a feeling. So managing the feeling is the most important part of getting through the process. And that's what I'm going to say about the Centaur and Chiron and making the great sacrifice for the betterment of other people and to end your own suffering. It's just a feeling, darling. It's just a feeling, and we don't have to hang on to it, and we don't have to live there. We just have to figure out how to manage it. So if you're feeling it and you're being overwhelmed by your feelings, reach out to people who understand what that's about and can help you navigate those stormy seas better until you can get your day in the sun too. All right, my lovies, and now we're going to close up. So here's some interesting stuff for you. The next grand alignment that we're going to have, are you ready for this, will occur in 2043. So we're going to be under this Capricorn alignment for a long time. Thank God it is well supported and easy. When we get to 2043, this is going to be a Pisces alignment. It's going to be a grand alignment in Pisces. Look at this. This is beautiful. So some things to look forward to if you're still going to be around in 2043. One, Pisces represents the Christ consciousness, or in Buddhism they call it the metta. Metta is defined as loving kindness in English dictionaries. It's a feeling of benevolent affection. But in Buddhism, loving kindness, or in Pali metta, or in Sanskrit maitri, it's thought of as a mental state or attitude cultivated and maintained by practice. Not the same thing as feeling compassion or pity. Very different thing. This cultivation of loving kindness is an essential part of Buddhism, for those of you who are not Buddhist. When we get to the grand alignment in 2043, who knew we'd ever get here, right? The 2000s. That will start the new evolutionary cycle for all of us. So it's 2020, 2043, we got like 23-ish years of this Capricorn alignment we've got to get through. Luckily, it's a good Capricorn alignment, and we're going to be A-okay. We just got a little bit of cleanup to do here at the transition stage between the Grand Taurus alignment ending and the Grand Capricorn alignment beginning. For those of you who are interested in metta or loving kindness as a meditation practice, there's a really great lesson and explanation about what it is here at www.thoughtco.com/lovingkindnessmetta 449703. And thank you so much for visiting my channel and hanging out and listening to me. If you are interested in more, there are 3 things you can do for me. Super easy to do. You can support the channel by liking, subscribing, and or sharing with people that you know. Because the YouTube algorithm, I don't show up very prominently in browse and search features. So your sharing me helps for people who may be interested in what I have to offer. The second thing, send me a note, make comments, suggestions, or make requests in the comment section. I try to get back to everybody. I am a little busy right now. I'm back in school and working and doing this. So I'm not doing this full time as my only occupation because unfortunately I don't have a husband paying my bills. So I'm kind of on my own with this. So my time is a little more limited, but I do love hearing from you guys, and I will try to respond when I can. And I do get most of your comments. So comments, suggestions, requests always help me make content that is better for you. And finally, please bear with me. Pardon my amateur video efforts. This channel is evolving, and I'm always looking for ways to improvement. And just like you and astrology, I'm learning as I go along about video production and video editing and all that sort of stuff. So it's a little clumsy here and there, but we're getting better. We're getting better. All right. So that's it. The video for this eclipse and Trump is a separate video coming up for you guys who are interested. And stick around. We'll see you later. Bye.